Bold leaders, no buzzwords, no BS. This is Mastering Workplace Culture, real talk on crafting workplace cultures that deliver results. Each episode, we go beyond corporate speak and talk with leaders who've actually done it. Those who've faced breakdowns, made bold moves, and built organizations where respect and results carry equal weight. If you're ready to challenge assumptions, gain actionable inspiration from proven mentors, and build a workplace culture that actually works, this podcast is for you.
Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of the Mastering Workplace Culture podcast. I'm a co-host. I'm Chris Edmonds. Mark, introduce yourself.
Hi, Mark Babbitt here.
And I get the pleasure of introducing today's guest, Dan Vetras. Dan has 30 years of successful experience in business and technology leadership, including 3 CEO stints at Visible Technologies, Talisma, and Captura, as well as executive sales positions at IBM and Lotus. As the former CEO of Collective, Dan was actively involved in understanding the needs of their global customer base, building a world-class team, and driving an agile and innovative culture, which we're clearly quite interested in. Throughout his career, Dan has served as a valued advisor to many organizations, from AI-focused firms to finance and banking to infrastructure. So, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, gentlemen. Happy to be here.
So, Dan, let me jump in with our first question for you. You have 30 plus years of accomplished leadership experience, from local banking all the way up to global enterprise solutions like IBM and Lotus. That puts you in the upper echelon of most culture leaders. What's the key to your success? What do you attribute to the work that you've done and the quality that you've achieved?
Well, I don't know if I'm in the upper echelon, but I feel like I've done a lot in my career, and I've been very fortunate, extremely fortunate to learn early on from some of the biggest companies in technology that provided some really in-depth training, coaching, all the things that you would want and may not be able to receive in today's world compared to what it was 30 plus years ago. I think I'm a fairly quick study, but I'm also more than willing to be critiqued in any format, including some of the original sales training I went through, where they would video film you role playing and then play it back in front of an audience. That can definitely test your ego. But if you're open to the feedback and the constructive critiquing, it's only going to make you better.
Absolutely. Well, and throughout your career, Dan, you've experienced, let's call them legacy workplace cultures that were perhaps more rigid than those that were and are wholly inclusive and innovative and creative, maybe. So, what positive traits did those cultures have in common?
Well, you're right. I did, and I'm sure you guys did too, grow up in an era where you wore a suit and tie to work 5 days a week, and you thought getting out early was at 4 o'clock on a Friday if you left the office, right? So, and I know it sounds like I walked uphill to school both ways, that adage, but there definitely was a different expectation of you from an accountability timing standpoint. I'm not saying people aren't accountable today and don't deliver on that accountability on a regular basis, but it was very rigid. That is exactly the word. Very professional, not just in the way you dressed, the way you conducted yourself. And I think a lot of that can cross over to today's work environment. You could argue that you have to be even more disciplined today because you have way more freedom than you ever did back then. You were pretty much told to be in an office 5 days a week, unless you were out calling on clients, but then back in that office the next day or the day after. So in the hybrid remote world we live in, it's probably a lot easier to get distracted than it was back then.
Is there I know that you've had experience with looking to, as you go into organizations, serving as what could be an interim CEO, longer term CEO, but you kind of inherit what you inherit. Have you found that your more innovative organizations have a wider range of ages and experience, and or vice versa, or other end of the spectrum? Are the more innovative ones those with maybe not crusty old white guys like Mark and me, but is there a pattern to when you see the most productive, creative, innovative cultures? What makes up those cultures? Who's in those cultures?
Yeah, it's a great question. I learned early on when I was offered an opportunity to be an expat with Lotus over in the UK in my 20s, late 20s, where I was the only American in an office of 130 people. And well, the MD was at that time, but everybody else was European. That taught me way more than an MBA would, quite frankly, those few years I was there. And one of the things about tech that I really find incredibly appealing and have even used as an example that the world would be a better place if everybody had spent a few years in tech, because you're constantly engaging with people from diverse cultures. Diversity in tech means different countries, different languages, not just the color of your skin or whether you're a male or a female. It is all over the world, and we get along. We learn from each other, and even the people that are not from the U.S. but are residing here, as well as obviously bringing the Europeans into the fold, bringing the APAC region. In every company that I've run, I've actually helped open up international with people that I knew from previous lives, whether that's Sydney or Singapore, London or Munich. So it definitely allowed me to be a much more open-minded and thoughtful person, because tech just draws some really interesting personalities and people. They're all smart. We all know, and we know that most, if not all, smarter than me. But the ability to get along and appreciate their perspective because of where they were raised and brought up.
Dan, you mentioned just a few minutes ago how different things are in a hybrid or remote world, even if it's remote only part time. And now you talk about the way people are raised and how that impacted culture, but you're talking about variables that an employer just can't control unless they're deliberately hiring for that, right? Somebody who can work well solo, somebody who is self-disciplined enough to get their work done, even though Netflix is calling them, right? Somebody who works hard at getting along with others. This has got to be a commonality among all the great cultures you've experienced.
Absolutely. And it's pretty easy, unfortunately or fortunately, to see one bad apple spoiling the bunch, if you will. So when everyone's rowing in the same direction and somebody isn't or won't, more likely won't, it becomes really apparent, and you have to make a move at that point, because it's not consistent or coherent with what the business needs or wants, more importantly.
Well, and I will date myself a bit. Way back when I did leadership development and had the pleasure of having some global clients, and one of the strongest work cultures that I was able to learn from and work in as an external consultant was Microsoft. And back then, it was if you didn't carry your weight it didn't matter how smart you were, what degrees you had, what experience you had with this team or that MD or whatnot. You weren't given lots of second or even third chances. You were invited out, sometimes rather assertively. And I wonder, I would say I didn't experience that. And a lot of the other tech clients I had the pleasure of working in, is back in your 20s in Lotus, was that the mindset at Lotus, for example?
Uh, Absolutely. A lot of high achievers, they tended to hire out of IBM and digital equipment and HP and places like that where you were formally trained, Data General, Wang, etc. Especially as a Massachusetts-based company.
Hmm.
For people to work at headquarters in Cambridge, I was always in the field other than a couple of staff assignments, but the bar was high, and they didn't fool around. It also was amazing to me. When I joined, I was 26. The average age in that company was 26. Average.
That's young.
The CEO, Jim Manzi, was 31. So
Wow.
it was fun. There was a lot of fun. There's no question about that. But particularly, in a field selling role, the numbers, they speak for themselves. So it's very hard to hide when you're carrying a quota.
Dan, we've been talking about the commonalities among the cultures you've enjoyed working in, but then there's another side of this too, right? Where there's certain, I don't know, traps that might be laying in wait for a culture leader, especially maybe when you're brand new there. That what people say their culture is turns out maybe that's not entirely true. What culture traits in the companies you worked for, both domestically and internationally, really caught you off guard? What threw you for a loop?
I'd say the word selfish comes to mind. That you can tell pretty quickly whether somebody is all in and willing to go beyond what their particular job description and or responsibility is. Especially, again, if you've got the majority of the people who are all willing to do that and extend themselves. Early in my career, very early, when I opened up an office for Lotus in Philadelphia, that region was the fourth largest city in the country. They had no presence there. And we were in New York for a quota carrying session at the beginning of a new fiscal year. And our manager, who I'm still friends with today, was told by his manager that they had to take on a bigger number than they originally anticipated for the region. And as we went around the room, it was interesting who was willing to put their hand up and take on part of that, if not all of it, and who wasn't. And at the end of it, myself and a fellow colleague in Philadelphia, who I recruited into the company because we had worked together in a previous one, we took the number and said, we'll do it. We'll find a way to do it in a very unproven territory at that point. I mean, we had literally just opened up the office within
Wow.
8 to 10 months earlier. So that kind of stood out with me. And I honestly have a low tolerance for people that aren't willing to be team players.
Mm-hmm. Hence selfish.
Well, yeah, that's the word I used. There are probably many others you could use to describe that trait. But Mark, we talked about this when we first met. I played a lot of sports, team sports growing up. And I think there's a direct correlation where you have to put yourself second and think about the team, whether you're a starter or you're on the second team or the third team, or you're trying to fight your way onto the roster at any level. So it taught me an awful lot because I wasn't a blue chip outstanding athlete. I had to work for everything I got. And that's why I think I have a lot of appreciation for hard work and for people that are willing to do more than color outside the lines, if you will, when it comes to helping.
It leads me to a question about your experiences. You've inherited companies here in the last 10, 15 years where that selfishness might have been a bit more commonplace, a bit more normal. How strong a hand can you take? And do you take a strong hand to redirect folks to say, we're going to cooperate, we're going to work together, we're going to share information? Those kinds of practices can, again, raise up all boats kind of a thing. Is that something you saw commonplace when you moved into an organization?
I don't know if it was commonplace, and we can probably talk about this later in the session. I've taken over for a founder in every situation. So you're inheriting a culture that you either absorb and adopt or you change. I think the direct answer is to bring in people that you know and trust and are of the same mindset you are. So in the second one I ran, I brought in the VP of sales from the previous one, domestic, the North America, and we had a kickoff meeting in January, as you do, at the headquarters in the Seattle suburb of Kirkland, Washington. And I wasn't in the room. I didn't have to be at the time because I knew I could trust this guy, who we're still friends today. Somebody in the back of the room had the USA Today open, and they were reading the sports section as he was up kicking the meeting off. And they didn't put the paper down. And he caught this and he called them out and summarily fired them in front of everybody.
Because
That
it
that
needed
sets
to
the culture
happen.
right there. Right.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say that tells a couple stories. One, his intolerance and perhaps yours for that kind of crap. And
Yeah.
two, exactly what had been tolerated in the past.
I guess I can't speak for that because I wasn't there, and I don't want to speak ill of any of those founders. They're all amazing and super smart people in their own right, but that did definitely set the tone for everybody on a Monday morning.
In January.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rules are changing just a little bit. Well, let me ask this. With today's leaders, many of them, Dan, as you have noted, especially in tech, brilliant, very well acclimatized to systems, to what's worked in their past organizations and what might work in this instance with this project or opportunity. But that puts pressures on today's leaders, and investors get pressure. Boards of directors get asked to embrace different leadership styles in managing executive teams. How do those pressures impact workplace cultures around the globe today?
Well, I don't think they're any less than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think in public companies, unless you're an officer, you probably don't really see it at the same level as you would in private ones. And private ones that are venture or PE backed, they're smaller in almost every case. There's more exposure, without a doubt, at many levels within the organization as opposed to just the C level. So it's a matter of how well you can handle that and not lose your cool, and understand that we're all in this together, as in the management team, in particular, because they're the ones on the front lines. They're the ones that are going to be measured on whether they deliver or not, whether that's shipping a product or making the quota or having an outstanding marketing campaign that drives the leads. I mean, there are a number of ways that we get measured every 90 days. And some people can handle the pressure and some people can't, but with the right support around them, as in their peer group, it clearly becomes easier.
So, Dan, what you mentioned earlier that you've taken over for founders in every situation or almost every situation, and we know from our previous conversations together, you've also working with VCs and investors, and you help companies actually find investors. What typically happens when those people making the rules, the founders, the VCs, as they come in, exclusively focus on results rather than building a place where people are genuinely proud to work?
Yeah, so I think we're talking about two different ends of the spectrum. I've never had a founder be overly focused on results as much as they were on their product that they had built and wanted the market to adopt. There's a line that you can't call their baby ugly because it's theirs, and they built it, and particularly in tech. And that's a really fine line to walk when you want them to get the appropriate feedback. So I'll stay with the founders for a second. My experience in tech, and I don't think it's a lot different. There are some major exceptions, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, but for the most part, founders come from an engineering background, very product focused, as they should be, have a lot more initiative, if you will, to build something and ship it. But at some point, almost all these companies have to morph from being very product and engineering and inwardly focused to very customer and sales focused and listen to the customer. And, salespeople get a bad rap sometimes as complainers, but in almost every case, all they're doing is parroting back what they're hearing from their prospects or their existing customers when it comes to either an initial sale or an upsell with new functionality. So yeah, I've jokingly told a lot of people this line: I'm not smart enough to start a company, but I'm dumb enough to run one. Well, it's true. They're two different skill sets.
Very much. Well,
Yeah.
and to what degree are you able to help those founders shift to sales, customer needs, away from their original babies, kind of production?
Well, it's not always easy, and the best way to do it is to keep them actively involved in the business. I've never tried to push anybody out or aside. Try to work with them as a co-pilot, if you will, and maybe they're the chief technology officer, maybe they're the VP of engineering, chief operating officer, finding a role where they can still contribute. VP of engineering, as I think I already said, but where they can contribute and they can be in a position where they're sitting in meetings where this honest and hard feedback is coming to them through the rest of the team on a regular basis, and then even invite them to get on a plane and go out and see some of these people themselves and hear firsthand what they like and, as importantly, what they don't like about the product or the technology stack. So it's keeping them in the game. It's not kicking them to the curb. I have too much respect for that. If they leave on their own, it's of their own volition. But I've never ever attempted to get rid of anybody.
All right, so that covers the founder side. It also brings up a dichotomy, if you will, of you have a founder who's responsible for the product and cares a great deal, emotionally invested in the product they created. But at some point, for many startups, if they hit a certain number of milestones, a VC is going to get involved, and they don't give a rat's ass about the product. They only care about results, right? So
that's a fairly accurate statement. I don't know if I'd be that aggressive with it, but they certainly are looking for a return on their investment in every case, and they have the funds, as you well know, that they promised them, because everybody has a boss. They have limited partners that they raise capital from to help, prop up the fund, if you will, financially. And in most cases, those are 10-year funds where they have to have a return. There have been extensions, especially during the pandemic and even recently, as recently as now. But, at some point, they're going to either make the money they intend to off of that investment, or they're going to sell it, or worst case, they're going to shut it down. And I think we all know the statistics of how VCs work, at least mathematically. If 1 out of 10 makes it, 2 out of 10 with the right multiple, a big multiple, then that, more than pays for everything they've invested in. Now, that doesn't sit too well with the other 8 or 9 that didn't make it, but it is a numbers game for them. And I don't think anyone should be naive enough not to think that.
And just culture, when that happens, does culture kind of go by the wayside? Have you ever had a situation where you say, look, I understand we have numbers. I understand you want a return on investment, but what you're suggesting doesn't match the current, the kind of culture we're trying to build here?
The way I would answer that is I'm not afraid to argue with any investor, any board member. I'm not easily intimidated. I'm beyond that. Maybe earlier in my career, I don't even think I was then, quite frankly. Once one manager walked up to me early in my career and said, you say everything that we were all thinking, but you're the only one that says it. And I said, you know what? That just pisses me off, because if you're thinking the same thing I am, why aren't you saying it the same way I am? Why are you putting it out there on a plank?
That's the culture.
Right. So, yes, I've had to push back. Yes, I've gotten into arguments. Yes, I've raised my voice with board members. Board dinners the night before a board meeting are an interesting thing if you do them. It sounds like a great idea to get everything out there, prior to the board meeting the next morning, until, everybody's had too much wine to drink. And then it can become tenuous, and everybody has even more of an opinion than they would at 9:00 the next morning with a cup of coffee in their hand, as opposed to a drink. So I've seen it all, and I'm not afraid to push back. Doesn't mean you're going to win. I mean, they've got the money and they've got the ownership. In most cases, nobody wants to give up a majority of their business to outsiders. But if you need to raise the capital, there aren't many options other than going the VC route or PE in some cases.
And I once got in trouble.
Banks aren't going to lend it to you.
Yeah,
banks only want to give you money when you don't need it.
That's right. That's right. I got in trouble one time for saying that the pre-meeting to a board meeting usually has alcohol. The board meeting has coffee at least until lunchtime, and then the post meeting most definitely has alcohol.
Yeah, if they stay around. If not, it's the management team drinking after it.
That's true.
Well, I wonder, Dan, and I'd love to ask, your job when you're plugged in as a CEO, either for an interim time frame or a longer time frame, is to create a culture where people will focus their intellect, their passions, even God forbid, even helping others in a teamwork setting, so that the productivity results targets, those numbers are exceeded. And yet a VC's got a number, it is under pressure, it has promises to its investors, etc. Is there a point at which you might say, give me 6 months? Or is it like, if you have experience with a board that is flat out only interested in results and doesn't care about the culture that you're trying to build, your hands are tied? Do you have to leave? Is that a common thing in the industry?
I think it's as common as head coaches getting fired in sports, right? Which happens all the time.
All the time.
John Harbaugh from the Ravens, right? He gets fired. Now he's coaching the Giants 30 days later, so he landed on his
Yeah.
feet, obviously.
He didn't stay out of a job long.
No.
Baltimore, and by the way, Baltimore will regret that the rest of their lives. But yes,
as will many others that happened or have happened. I think it's a numbers game again. You can only be in these senior leadership roles so long without maybe taking a bullet once in a while. And to your point, Chris, I've had some very mature conversations about give this thing another 6 to 12 months. And, if we are missing the mark at that point, then we either find a buyer or I've never had to shut a company down. So I've been very fortunate there, but we have had to sell companies under, less than desirable circumstances sometimes, but at least there is some return, even if it's not the same multiple that was originally forecasted, it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
How, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. Because I don't, Chris and I use the word, the title of our last book, we use the word uncompromising. And a lot of people asked us exactly what that meant to us. So maybe we can define that later. But a lot of times when we talk about culture, we talk about an unwillingness to compromise. Like, this is the kind of culture that I want to lead. This is the kind of culture I strongly believe will attract new people and keep our good people. And if the people that don't align with that want to leave or go be successful somewhere else, I'm okay with that. But how do you draw that this is the kind of culture I want to lead line in the sand and still make sure you meet the milestones that are required of you and maybe even exceed those expectations? What's the secret to that?
I don't know if there's a secret. I mean, I think a lot of people in our industry are beneficiaries of luck and timing. I've seen some people do exceedingly well financially that I question how that happened, other than they were in the right place at the right time. And I'm not critiquing their success or financial success or outcome, but a lot of this is, what's happening. I mean, AI right now, we could talk about that for the next half hour, but
that could be a whole different episode. Yeah.
Anthropic and OpenAI both want to go public, and NVIDIA announces an open source tool set today, and Zuckerberg writes a 6,500 word manifesto yesterday that everybody should get everything for free, right? Even their compute power using Bitcoin and BitSensor. So, who knows how that thing is going to shake out. For me, culture is, it's almost undefinable. Nobody walks in and says, hey, I'm not a big believer in mission and vision statements. You can write them, but if you don't, live up to them, they're more of a detriment than if you never had one to begin with. So it's culture is what you feel. It's not what you see, or not, feel and see. It's not what you write on a board.
Yeah.
It's not what you put in your MBOs on a quarterly basis. You either have it or you don't. Or not early. Let's see. The second company I ran, I spent a lot of time in Bangalore, India, a lot, and I probably know more about that culture than I do my own Greek heritage in some ways, because I was there so often and still stay in touch with and have strong friendships there. But one night, I was out to dinner with an executive, and we had a waiter that was of a darker skin color than my exec, who came from the Brahmin caste. If you know anything about castes in India, they still exist, as do arranged marriages there, and that's a cultural thing that you just accept. And when they have, and you're invited, you're going to be there with about 2,000 other people. That's an average wedding in India, but in any case, we were having dinner, and I didn't like the way this executive was treating the waiter. And I had just read an article in the Wall Street Journal a week earlier that you can tell a lot about people with how they treat anyone in the service industry, whether that's a hotel or a restaurant, at the airport, where we've all lost our cool, because of delays and other difficulties, mechanical difficulties. But when the waiter walked away, I said, if you don't change your attitude, I'm going to fire you tomorrow morning. And he couldn't believe that anyone spoke to him like that. But to me, it was indicative of, if you're doing this in this environment when someone's waiting on you and you're paying for the service, what do you like in other environments where you have even more control of the situation? So I have a low tolerance for people that aren't team players and people that don't treat other people with respect. Because that's really all you have at the end of the day is, your reputation.
Well, and I must ask, and it may not be a question you can answer to the affirmative. Did he get it, and did he change his tune?
From what I could tell, yes. And I still consider him a friend. We haven't spoken in quite a while, but I did work with him very closely.
Wow,
And
good.
I also, in that same company, there was a situation where I had to terminate the managing director because I found out that he was literally yelling at the employees. I mean, going back to like the 60s or 70s kind of mentality. And they were breaking down and could barely do their jobs because they were so afraid that they were going to get berated in front of each other. So we had to make a move there. And I think that sent a message to a lot of the employees.
So when you have to make a on the spot call like that, where let's call it a different line in the sand, but clearly that was the line in the sand to you, to the point you felt you had to correct him on the spot in a public place, probably discreetly, probably quietly,
Yeah, it was
probably
just the two of
politely.
us. there weren't another dozen people sitting around the
Okay,
table.
Yeah.
all right.
I
Well,
would not
still,
have done that. It was
probably
one-on-one.
professionally and empathetically. Do you expect a lesson learned like that to spread the next day in the office? Maybe he's not going to say what happened, but eventually somebody's going to hear about that and go, wow, this guy's not kidding.
I don't know if they would have in that scenario, but when we had to make a move on the managing director, who was the highest ranking person in that part of the world with over 200 employees, and that was done very discreetly and very professionally as well, but that sends a message for sure.
Well, I asked because you and I have a lot of similarities in our careers, and I flew to Kuala Lumpur one time to assess a leadership team. And Chris, I don't know if you ever heard this story, but I connected through Tokyo, and Tokyo had a foot of snow. Tokyo never has a foot of snow, but
well,
me
they
trying to
do
get
in
to
the
Kuala
mountains.
Lumpur, I got there a day late. So my right hand man had been there a day earlier than I had. He said, "Boy, you got to check this guy out. He's something." And so it was in front of everybody, and I observed and I reserved judgment for about 2 hours, and then I went, man, you can't work for us anymore. The way you talk to other people in this room, and maybe you're just showing off, I don't know, but this is not the game we play here, and I'm going to ask you to go clean out your desk. And he just laughed. He thought I was kidding. He was not, sir. I'm not kidding.
Yeah,
you are summarily dismissed. And he goes, well, you can't do that here. I think I can. I know you're running a union shop here, but you're not union, so
right.
I think I can.
Mm-hmm.
And the general manager of the plant just looked at him and went, and that was it.
Yeah, there's a quietness that exist in any of those scenarios, situations where people, uh, are hoping that there's a change. They may not be strong enough to um, approach somebody like you, Mark, in advance. But when you see it, you know it. What did one of the Supreme Court justices? I can't describe pornography, but when I see it, I know it. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you remember that line?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see abuse, you know it, and you
Yeah.
have to do something about it.
Well, and the Mark and I talk a great deal about leaders that might not be certain what's the right way to approach this. They're shocked at seeing that
Yeah.
kind of treatment, and pondering is not the right response. And it could be, let's take a break, whatever. It needs to be done discreetly, but if leaders are seen as tolerating mistreatment in any means, then that culture is going to be, it's not going to be a fun place for people to live. They know they're not going to be respected or validated, and they may not do their best work for the company at the same time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Agree.
Well, I wanna ask you. You are in a cool position. You had finished an assignment a few months back, if I remember that properly, and you now are doing some cool things with some clients. But are you, if you were handed an opportunity, and maybe even the VC investors board would say, the culture's a little weird, but we need your help with that. Would that be kind of the perfect opportunity as you would see it? Because you care about culture.
I think so. It's very, very relative to a lot more than just that. Who the VCs are, what the technology is, how long they've been around.
Gotcha.
Is the founder still in charge? Which, if they are, I'm fine with that. As I think I've proven. I'd like to run something again, and I did complain once early in my career to a VC that I'm still friends with to this day. I said something out of frustration that there's not a mop and pail big enough for me to clean up the mess you handed me.
Wow.
And and he said, Dan, if it wasn't for people like them, we wouldn't need people like you to come in and clean it up. And I said, oh, all right, valid point.
Okay.
Well
So
said. Very
so I
well
took
said.
that with me throughout my career, and I don't think there are many problems that are too big to solve. And if it has to do with getting the right people, getting the right culture instilled or reinstilled, I do really like those situations. They're hard, but they're rewarding as you come out of the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if I can add, you described being able to recruit folks that you've worked with before. They're, in essence, known to you to be of like mind around how we're going to run this company, how we're going to manage people, how we're going to manage sales, how are we going to manage customers, and we've had a number of guests talk about a bit of a source of pride being that people are willing to follow them because they trust them. They appreciate the work that you do to create a culture that's a bit more sane rather than nutty. And that's, you described that already as bringing some folks with you that can maybe help accelerate that change.
I'm proud of that. It is something that the VCs do ask, and I'm not sure they're necessarily asking it because of the cultural impact as much as, hey, you work with these people before, you can trust them, they've delivered for you. And it helps certainly ease their minds that you're not building something completely from scratch. And particularly with, again, coming back to the international aspect of a US based company, you have to be able to trust these people. I mean, you're sleeping when they're awake in APAC. And, if you're on the West Coast and they're in the UK, it's 8 hours from here, 9 hours to the continent. There's a whole day where they could do whatever they want. And it's going to take you a while to figure out that you're not getting the effort that you expected, intend. So when you can put people in any position that you worked with before and respect and like, but particularly when they're outside of the US, it just allows you to have a much, much better peace of mind.
Absolutely. And probably them too.
Yeah,
I would think so.
I'll share, Chris. I hadn't shared this with you yet, but we have contributors, Dan, everywhere from the Philippines to Cairo, and our friend and teammate in Cairo said needed to express himself openly, and that's not part of their culture. And the boss is the boss, and I said, well, say what you want to say. And so he did. And I, didn't overreact or anything. It was fine. And he said, the best part about working for this team is that I can respect that you guys, you and Chris, show everyone respect.
I know it's something you take for granted, but it's not always the case. And I think the other thing that I really, really try to convey to people outside of the U.S. is how much I want to learn even more about their culture, about their country. And I started reading the Financial Times newspaper in my 20s, and I still read it every day online now. But, whenever I would travel internationally, I would bone up on not what was just happening with, maybe the 3 or 4 or 5 customers we were going to go see, or channel partners, but what were the politics there? What's happening that they talk about at their dinner table that I can talk about with them at our dinner table? Because I think that goes a long way with them understanding that you really care more about, just did they hit their number for the quarter?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Powerful.
Well, Dan, what's we try to give everybody a few minutes at the end of every episode to tell us about what they love doing when they're not working. What gets you out of bed in the morning?
The gym. So I right or wrong, I'm a type A firstborn, and I have to exercise literally every day. I try to break that up. I've got a local gym in town here where we do hit high intensity interval training classes for 45 minutes of nonstop work. I'm one of the oldest people there right now, but I don't feel like it. I've got a home gym with a Peloton, and if you know what a tonal gym is, you mount it on the wall, and LeBron and Serena endorse it, so it must be good, right? No, it's a good thing. I've started to do rucking, where I wear a 20-pound vest.
Wow.
And you don't have to have much elevation to make that work. But outside of torturing myself, I like to play golf. We also have a 10-year-old Great Dane dog that we are living on borrowed time with. So we walk her.
I was say 10 years old for a Great Dane that's quite an accomplishment all by itself.
Yeah.
Well, because she eats better than we do and takes more supplements, but
a little spoiled.
Yeah. But we walk her on a regular basis. I'd like to go out and have a good meal once in a while. Still am very avidly much a sports fan. So, and I've become, I guess, more of an international sports fan. I've really, like a lot of Americans, even before the World Cup, I've been in multiple Premier League games over in the UK, and have such a respect for those athletes. I think the best athletes in the world are basketball players. Now, the Brits would argue that they're not. It's soccer or football, as they say. But very much in college football, all that stuff. So athletics, exercise, good food, and good wine.
That sounds like a
I'm a pretty
perfect
simple guy.
afternoon.
Yeah, I'm not that complicated.
Very cool. Well, Dan, it's been delightful to learn from you here today. And I'm sure our listeners were taking notes. And what I hope our listeners will take from this is that it's never unimportant to focus on the people's experience as well as the output that your organization is aiming at. So you've definitely given us some great insights from the tech world with your experience, Dan. So thank you for that. And we'll invite you to keep your eye out for the next episode of Mastering Workplace Culture. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
This has been Mastering Workplace Culture. No jargon, no corporate fairy tales, just leaders who show their scars and celebrate their wins. Do something with what you heard today. Subscribe, share, take action. Creating a culture that equally values respect and results is your responsibility. Go own it. When you're ready to make that happen, we're here to help. We'll catch you in the next episode of Mastering Workplace Culture.